possibly the biggest debate in presidential history, at least in recent memory. We're talking about one of the most viewed as far as streamed across platforms online, of course, watched on your TVs as well, the Kamala Harris Donald Trump debate, the first and possibly only one. So we want to bring on with us from Fox 11 Los Angeles, and then also, of course, from the Issue Is Elex Michaelson. You were, of course, closely watching this debate. You had a show, you had a wrap up afterwards. You had this instant reaction. What was your instant reaction to what happened at the debate? Has anything changed since you watched the debate?
Well, I think the instant reaction was the sort of amazement at what was a clear and obvious strategy from Kamala Harris that Donald Trump went with every time. This idea of probably having a laundry list of things that they did in debate prep of all of Donald Trump's pain points and to sprinkle them into every answer so that he would be distracted by that, focus on that, and not focus on prosecuting the case against her or even tying her to Joe Biden. His big objective was to tie her to Joe Biden. He didn't really do that as explicitly the way that he wanted to until the closing statements over an hour and a half in. Harris able to do most of what she wanted, Trump not able to do very much of what he wanted. And in terms of coming out of the debate, the question is, of course, how much, if any, does that impact anything? The number of undecided voters is so small in so few states that, initial polls, we're not seeing huge shifts because of this debate. I don't know what the undecided voters at this point need to see because the contrast is pretty clear. This race is really tight. It was really tight going into the debate, and it's really tight coming out of it.
I thought it was interesting with CNN's Will Enton, who showed the graphic of like the percentage points of people that thought Trump won that first debate against Joe Biden. I think it was something like 26 or 32. Then the opposite number was either 26 or 32 in favor of Kamala Harris that second time around. How important is the role of early voting this election? Because you're going to have a lot of people that are starting to vote in these next couple weeks, and this might be the last time that they see this, or it's going to be the last time they see this, at least until maybe another few weeks or a month, if they're just going to go out there and vote from what they saw based on that debate.
Yeah, we really do have at least an election month or election seasons at this point. I always hate and always caution other reporters at our station not to refer to, the last day to vote as election day, because that's the way, this many days till election day. I think that's misleading. I think the correct verbiage would be you have this many days left to vote, because people are already making their decisions in some states, and that makes it much more complicated in terms of political strategy. It is a whole different way of doing things. And part of the challenge really for Republicans is that Donald Trump, by continuing to say and raise doubts about absentee ballots, about voting early, about the system, it's kind of tied Republicans at least one hand behind their back, because if Democrats, are now voting for a month and Republicans leave it all up to the day, and what if somebody gets sick, or what if somebody has to work to do, or what if somebody hits traffic, or what, there's all sorts of things that could happen on election day that would lead you not to vote. And so it really has created this disproportionate advantage for Democrats. And it's something that Republicans in our state are pushing back on. I was at an event a few weeks ago with RNC Chairman Michael Whatley, the chair of the California Republican Party, Jessica Patterson, others saying, trust the system, join us. Be poll workers, be a part of the system. It's all okay. Vote early. And then you have Trump, on the other hand, talking about if the only way he could have won California is if Jesus was counting ballots. So those two messages don't go together.
No, they don't. And as you were talking about election season and that last month to vote, last few days to vote, of course, I guess we can also say in California particularly, there's not necessarily an election night either because of how long it takes for those rest of those ballots to be counted too. So
Right.
people that are expecting those instant results, of course, we can look back to 2020 as well as a good example of that versus results that we had the night of versus what we saw that next day. As well. And then I was just thinking too, it used to be before we looked at this from the political perspective, okay, how can you vote in this election where you had people voting early, or you have absentee ballots. It used to just be a matter of convenience, right? I mean, I just remember as a student at the University of Iowa, if I had an exam coming up around election day or so, I had the chance to vote early. I mean, that's the situation that most people had because it was a convenience for work. And of course, now it's more of this political discussion that we see brought in to this election, particularly this one more than any other one we've seen before.
Right. And one thing that changed, of course, during the pandemic is that they started mailing ballots to everybody, even if you didn't ask for one. So before you would have to ask for a ballot to be mailed to you. Now everybody gets a ballot, and including people that may not be interested in voting. They're registered and it shows up at their house. And then there's all sorts of challenges of this wrong address or this person or all sorts of other things that are supposed to get figured out later with the voter verification system, with a lot of the cross checks that are supposed to happen afterwards, which is why it takes so long to count the ballots. But a lot of people have doubts about the system because they see some of the problems beforehand.
And when we go back to looking at this debate, of course, we're looking at whether or not we'll see this again, whether or not it'll matter if we see it again. Does the vice presidential debate matter? We saw J.D. Vance in the spin rooms. He was on with a few different networks. He was trying to make the case for Donald Trump. How effective is him making the case for Donald Trump in a debate versus Tim Walz in 1 month from now, a little bit less than 1 month from now? How will that be portrayed for the Trump campaign? Because they need somebody to make that case, right?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, the vice presidential debate has not mattered all that much. People vote for the president, and traditionally, a lot of times debates don't matter all that much. Although, of course, this year's first debate, a notable exception, which led to the president being out of the race. But I don't know. I mean, the vice presidential debate will give all of us something to talk about and probably some memes and some moments. And if the election really is as close as we all think that it is, and it comes down to the margins of a few thousand people in a few states, maybe the vice presidential debate does matter. Maybe there's a moment in there that sways some of those people. And who knows, if we're going to have another presidential debate or not. Harris says she wants one. Trump has been less eager to do that, which I find interesting. But if it looks like Trump is down, or the continual negative media speculation about his performance gets under his skin, maybe he'll do it just because he likes being on TV and he wants to prove people wrong.
Yeah, it was just 1 week ago where you had many experts, analysts saying, okay, Tim Walz maybe was not the best person to have side by side in the CNN interview with Dana Bash, because then all the questions went to his military service and record. There wasn't too much that was focused on him that wasn't something about a question about his past. Then you had J.D. Vance, of course, trying to make his case to the best of his abilities recently as well. And of course, there has to be some correction, of course, between Vance and Trump. There seems to be the disconnect on the issue of abortion and IVF. That seems to be something that'll be interesting to watch as well. I want to get back to one last point here about whether or not the debates matter for this election. Well, I was speaking with a political science professor yesterday. You talked about Trump's performances against women candidates, going back all the way to Carly Fiorina, to Hillary Clinton, to Nikki Haley. And one thing that Trump has in common, or that was in common with all three, is he ended up winning all three elections, no matter the debate performance, no matter if he even debated Nikki Haley at all. And of course, I think if we went back to 2016 at the time, I think a lot of people would suggest that Hillary Clinton had won those debates. But at the end of the day, it didn't seem to matter as much. Is that something we can take away from this? That, okay, Kamala Harris, people are riding high on her, but did it really matter when we look at the final results?
Obviously, we're not going to know that until we see the final results. I mean, one thing that's different about this year and this particular moment, which is probably a unique moment in American history, is that Kamala Harris was not a candidate in the primaries, and she just became the nominee. And so there's a lot of questions about who she is, what she's about. When a candidate goes through the primary, they do hundreds of interviews. They do debates in the primary. They do rallies. They do town hall meetings. They do all of these different places and spots, big crowds, small crowds, local reporters, national reporters, random podcasts, all this stuff where you kind of kick around the tires and get a sense of who somebody is. She didn't go through that. And she'd only done the one major interview with Dana Bash. So there's so many questions about who Kamala Harris is, what she's about, which is why I think there there was 30% of the country wanted to hear more about her going into the debates. Part of the reason the ratings for the debate were so big because people still have questions about who she is. And so that's different than like if there was, a second Biden-Trump debate, both of them being president, both of them with their records, kind of everybody had a take on that going in. I think there are some people that maybe don't pay that close attention to this that are trying to say, Kamala Harris, what's that about? I want to get a sense of that. And that's even different than when Hillary Clinton was running against Trump.
And I think one last point on that too is that it was odd to see the sense that we saw what Kamala Harris is able to do in a debate and be able to make her points and put forward coherent arguments where there had been a lot of doubt cast, especially from conservative outlets, about whether or not she could do it. Then it was just that everyone forgot that she's a lawyer and former DA and Attorney General of California when she's able to make those arguments. But I think a lot of people too were looking at this from an incumbency record for both. And that's how she made her arguments too. It wasn't necessarily the plans for the future or the specifics for the future. And I know there's the thought, okay, not too many specifics come out in a presidential debate, but there wasn't seem to be that outline plan forward outside of just messaging. There's no details or specifics, and same can be said on the other side too. So I think there's the question, okay, did we really learn a lot about what will happen in the future versus what we already knew about the person? And maybe we know more about their ability to speak and their ability to have moments like this that we don't typically see them in, as in the role of vice president currently.
Yeah, and we really didn't. I mean, there wasn't a long laundry list of what would a Harris presidency look like. She spent a lot of the time prosecuting the case of all of Donald Trump's past grievances. But that strategy seemed to be working for her. She got under his skin and she made the debate about him and his weaknesses and basically was able to not have it be about any of her weaknesses. Because Trump was distracted, he didn't prosecute a lot of her weaknesses. The moderators asked questions about her weaknesses, but then never fact checked her and never followed up with her. And she was basically able to walk out of those discussions that were thorny for her without really any damage and make it all about him. So yes, it's true that Kamala Harris did not really explain very many of her plans for the future. She didn't really explain that much of her biography for people that were curious about her. And she really did not make the debate about her. But I think the Harris campaign would say a debate about Donald Trump's conspiracy theories, in their view, is a pretty good debate for them.
And something we're looking forward to this week is this week's episode of The Issue Is, of course, 6 a.m. in Bakersfield, but you can watch that, of course, ahead of time on the Fox 11 Los Angeles website and, of course, Elex Michaelson YouTube page. Is there something for us to look forward to this week? I know there always is, but what in
Well, Donald Trump's coming to town. So I'm going to be out with Trump in Rancho Palos Verdes at the time that we're recording this. That hasn't happened yet. So I don't know if he's going to be taking questions from us or get a chance to interview him one-on-one. I'm going to do my best and get in there and see what happens there. We're also going to be talking with political analyst Brian Goldsmith, one of the smartest guys I know, and Mayor Darrell Steinberg. Is going to be talking about Proposition 36. Last week, we had on Mayor Matt Mahan, the Democratic mayor of San Jose, who's in favor of Prop 36 as the effort to reform Prop 47. Darrell Steinberg, the mayor of Sacramento, is against it. So we'll get the other perspective from him. Plus, I want to bring back a conversation that I had a few months ago with Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman of the United States, which at the time we didn't even really get to run because there was so much happening. And now he's at the center of so many people's consciousness. Our conversation with him about women's sports, about anti-Semitism, and about his hometown, Agora Hills, which I share with him. So all that coming up this week on The Issue Is.
Lots of fascinating conversations looking like they're going to happen there. And of course, so much going on in just such a little period of time. It doesn't feel like we get a break this political season, which is a good thing. And then also sometimes a bad thing as far as stress is concerned. But it's something that I think whenever we cover these kinds of things, you say, well, we wouldn't want to have it any other way. We wouldn't want to miss opportunities like this. So thank you so much for coming on this week. We appreciate having you. And we look forward to seeing that interview should it come.
Thank you very much. And yes, I'm ready for vacation.